All right, it is 12 o'clock, and as participants come in, just reminding you that this is being recorded, and I look forward to sharing this recording back out to all of you. We will have some time for question and answers, so I do invite you to chime in when you can in this webinar context. It will be a little more sit and get. And I appreciate you sharing perhaps your lunchtime or end of school day with me here. In service to our short time and my excitement with what I have to share, I'm just going to be off to the races. So today it's about sharing we are resilient for educators. The phrase is practice makes better, about our own resilience and remaining centered in service to the students who are walking through the doors very shortly or have perhaps in some cases. My name is Bryan Clement, and I'm happy to be here with you. A little bit about today. This webinar is for you. It is not more to do. And sometimes I think trainings and webinars, they occur like that to a person, something that they have to articulate and repurpose and put back out with some kind of checklist or accountability, but this is really in service to you. And I am so happy to share a little bit about myself through this process, as well as the wonderful team and work of Dovetail Learning. So it's really about our program model and sort of a high overview with some nuggets that we like for you. And then a brief resource walk and closing with a bit of a question and answer. I do have it as a 30-minute quick webinar in service to all your preparation for the upcoming school year. And I do also invite just a breath, a sit back and relax. Open up your mind, be a little curious about what I get to share here with you. First and foremost, Dovetail Learning, we're proud to offer We Are Resilient. It's been part of our mission since day one. Over 12 years ago when we opened our doors, that really it's about resilience, both in adults and children, and in service to a larger, longer mission and vision of a world of kind, connected human beings. And I have to say, at this time, I'm particularly appreciative of our team who also lives that out in our values each day. A little bit quickly about me, right? Been in education for over 18 years, father and husband with a wonderful family there, doing our best. I've been a teacher, I've been a principal, been leading SEL work. Our flagship program was called Toolbox. My wonderful son there is in the curriculum if you happen to have it. And we've been really consulting in service to social emotional learning with trauma-informed care. And the best word now that we have for it is really healing-centered schools, right? That's been the work over time. And what you notice there too is I felt compelled to share about my Lola, my grandmother, because I'm deeply aware of the work in a larger context of our history and social fabric here together, which really puts a social justice lens on my work. And then that final picture here is, well, it gets better with time because that is now Attorney General Rob Bonta, then Senator. Been doing policy education work in the area of trauma-informed care with a California campaign to counter childhood adversity. Again, the Equity Education Initiative in Sonoma County, and then fortunate to work with some wonderful colleagues in NTAC, National Training and Technical Assistance Center for Youth and Family and Children's Services, something very complicated, but really fortunate to have some wonderful colleagues in the space. And so I guess all this is in service to, I love this work, and thank you for listening. And I've put it in, and we as a team collectively offer We Are Resilient with all these threads of trauma and strength-based education in mind. Also, I would be remiss if I didn't take into consideration the larger context that we're all experiencing, especially with the re-creep of the Delta variant and what that feels like for all of us, and this new normal of feeling a little bit off balance. And I have to say that using and modeling the work in our organization every day has allowed me personally and my family, well, at least me not to be a contributing stressor to my family, the ability to weather this storm and the storms that come to us in a more resilient way. In terms of educators and caretakers, I want to kind of front end this to help name and claim what the last, 16 to 18 months have been, as you've been asked to pivot, redo, reapply, be flexible, feel evaluated, exposed, not only with your students and those that you work with, but of our whole other side of our personal lives, right? That have been tricky as well with so many complications over the last year. And I found this term in articles called surge capacity depletion. And I think that's a great starting point to honor what perhaps you might be feeling like or trying to recover from given our long stretch together. And it just says it right here that surge capacity is collection of adaptive systems, mental and physical, that humans draw on for short-term survival in acutely stressful situations such as natural disasters. Well, we've had this enduring stressor, and being a Sonoma County resident now 4 years running, of literally it's in the air, the smoke, the stress, the displacement, the family cycles. So for me, leveraging Dan Siegel's work, right? We have to name it to tame it. And I just want to kind of offer this as our starting point for your own resilience and remaining centered so we can be of service. And doing a quick little history of how we came to We Are Resilient, just because I think it puts things into context before even we knew the term shelter in place or COVID, right? So this is a long mission for us. It started out with SEL, for children, emotional awareness and regulation. Fantastic. But in our consulting and truly being trauma informed, we learned what was needed, right? It was training for the teachers, our own needs first, so that we could develop, in like Fullen's, I think, work is coherence, is his language. We call it a common language for everyone in the building, administrators and staff, and ultimately, and in partnership with families as well. So these are the challenges, right? Only made more difficult in the COVID era. The burnout, the compassion fatigue, or sometimes called vicarious trauma, when we're in relationship with young people and learn their stories and the stories of their families. And additionally, as an educator, we find the tier 2 and tier 3 systems kind of tricky for referral. And often it occurs to us as, well, what can I do now in this moment? And my simple answer is take care of yourself and remain centered. And from that position, you will find a way to connect and provide for the student and the students in your care what is needed. So it allows you to be your most present self and most responsive, empathetic person that you can be. So today we've been fortunate to work in multiple contexts because this is what we think is needed. It's really about our own awareness and our own social emotional work, which at least when I went through my teacher credentialing system, the pre-service work wasn't so much about our own needs and what the job entails in terms of an emotional investment that we all give so much to, and that we need to foster this wellness together. And again, in this unique context of perhaps what a restart will be, not only for ourselves back in person all day, all the time. Some of you have been there more, but what does this restart look like for all of us? And then finally, I think it's important to note, and I will do some resource share, that this is for everyone. This is for you. This is an open educational resource because that is our value. We think wellness needs to be freely shared. So I encourage you to share this webinar that's recorded and the resource links as well. So remaining centered, right? We call them practical skills for lifelong wellness. And in our We Are Resilient approach, we really kind of break it up into two categories. Patterns, what we call our cultural patterns and our protective patterns for self-awareness about me, learning about self, and then ultimately giving and layering in skills, specific research-based skills. So this is a curated set of research-based skills that allow us to move into possibility for ourselves, with others, and then with the groups that we serve. Our cultural patterns, which we won't spend time on here in this moment, really start with the awareness of how we view the world, what is in our lives in our formative years. And then additionally, we call our protective patterns, which we'll hover in a little bit here today, about how we react to the world. It's what we do in our externalized and internalized behaviors in service to ourselves. And then ultimately, we talk about our skills is really the possibility of creating, choosing, having agency in this world in a concrete next step. That's our program sort of overview in the buckets. I also like to throw this in here because it's sort of a conceptualization that our protective and cultural patterns exist in us. They're behind us. They influence us at every step. And it is the skills that I can use and choose to move forward. And in the terms connecting skills and collaborating skills, they're not skills for other people. They're actually skills I can choose to apply regardless of whether or not the other person or the other people receive them, right? But it's one way that I can have agency, not trying to control others, but actually sit with my own needs and awareness of my own cultural and protective patterns that operate always and influence how I even perceive the world, but really it's about how we react to the world. And again, one more representation here. You see this new icon emerging that sort of represents our idea of resilience. So the interrelatedness of it is on the top line, we have our patterns, how we view the world, how we react to the world, but also is the possibility of our cultural resilience and our reactive resilience, how we frame those internally. And then in service to our personal resilience, we can leverage our centering skills. In service to our connecting skills, we can leverage, in service to our relational resilience, we can leverage our connecting skills. And similarly, our collaborating skills help us move towards group resilience and create the world that we want. All right. And I love this imagery. Super appreciative of the work, Megan, who's our illustrator, working with us to really shape and offer up a new way of thinking about resilience as a continuum. Colleague of mine, Christy and Ashley, really took a stand on this idea that resilience isn't something you do or don't have, right? But rather it's a continuum. And even our own reactivity, which we call our protective patterns, which we'll cover here, is on the scale of resilience. You're doing it for yourself to create safety. There's a good and whole reason why you're reacting that way in service to that protection. So that imagery is about sort of protecting your sort of inner being, your light. And also we can use centering skills in service to our personal resilience, which sort of sets the continuum of resilience that we can operate from through to our relationships, into the groups that we serve, and ultimately our collective resilience. So really the awareness and acceptance and claim that resilience is actually a continuum that we are all on. And so we start with the victories. We like to shine a light, as my colleague Mary says, on these places. We want to bring a flashlight of hope into our own personal stories. And that it's there in us. It's an ordinary superpower. We have it, right? So this empowerment message, a strength-based message, and that it doesn't come from special qualities or it's rare, but it's inherently in us, and it isn't out there, it's in here. And happy to conceptualize it that way. And a new slide for me here is, if the feed cuts off now, or you only have 15 minutes, right? Get to a juicy nugget here, is with that awareness that it is a spectrum, the resilience is a continuum. This has been a very liberating, empowering statement for me and for our staff. I am not my most resilient self at this moment. that acknowledgement sort of lets in one's own self and needs. I have to say and give credit, of course, to Brene Brown, who's sort of the spectrum of the percentages, but that's how I and we interpret it and check in our heart check-ins as a company. I'm not my most resilient self at this moment. And the second part of this is, what resilient skill can I choose or honor right now? So I can choose a resilient skill, or I can honor my cultural or protective patterns. And those two phrases together, the acceptance and acknowledgement of the need and awareness that you're lower on the spectrum than perhaps you'd like, we can move into possibility, as we say, with that question: what skill can I choose or honor? And that very, very empowering, knowing that we can do that. And it's in service to, as one of our board members like to say, our resilient mindset. It's almost like a hat, right? And that starts with a curiosity, right? Even that question is a curious question. What could I choose right now? So curiosity, choice, ultimately a decision to use it, and the courage to stick with it, to apply it, to move forward, and to face what it is that's in front of us. Now, admittedly, this is a bit of an internal discussion because we call them resilient mindsets, and I coach it just a little bit differently. It's not a separate hat, but the resilient mindset hat is sort of a triangle tumbler that, for me, when I ask myself the question, what skill or pattern can I choose? It's somewhere in that cycle, pushing over the triangle. I can be curious, I can choose, I can have courage. If that doesn't work, what side of that change agent mindset can I leverage at this moment, right? So it's actually the falling forward between and through these each time that creates that movement forward. For me, that's part of my coaching lens on this particular idea of a mindset of resilience. So curiosity, choice, and courage makes them possible. And that, for us, remaining centered requires practice, right? That need and ability will then allow you to model and help others, right? So our caretaking of self is actually what is needed in service to our students and our colleagues and our family members and everyone else. It starts with our own needs. And then we can model it such that ultimately it becomes sort of an unconscious competence that we can coach using curiosity, inquiry, and encouragement for others. And the modeling dimension, too, is a distinction I want to make here, is that, obviously we don't want to be a dysfunctional model. It's reactive and off balance. And I want to sort of move away from this idea that we're asking you to be perfect. That's not the invitation here. It's controlled, it's inauthentic, but rather, however you feel comfortable in modeling your process of being centered or acknowledging that you're not your most resilient self, that is the learning model. That is the coping model. That is part of the human condition in context here together. So the coping model helps us be our best selves and help others see the way forward to being their best self by normalizing and humanizing this experience of being off center. But how do we come back? And again, in service to the mission of schools, right, and for the students, but it's really focus area 2, that CASTLE name, so the Collaborative for Academic and Social Emotional Learning, has named this as focus area 2. We think it is the area of most need in order to move ourselves and create the best environments for the students. Also, have to unpack just a touch this notion of that there's sometimes things that get in the way of our own resilience on any given day. Now, for those of you who follow any kind of trauma-informed learning and learning theory, there's a whole wonderful, amazing trainings on what trauma is, how it affects you. And ultimately, having been an ACE interface presenter with the County of Sonoma myself, and we can get really mired in the complexity of trauma, it's more manifesting in this sort of stress continuum, right? How does that occur to us? How do the events in our lives affect our stress levels, positive, tolerable, and toxic? And so this is our awareness for, hey, what's occurring to me? How is stress happening to me? What are my stress responses? But ultimately, the trauma narrative, I think, is wonderfully summed up in our executive director, Charles Chuck Fisher, his statement here: every human being has impeccable reasons for being exactly who they are, and that includes you, us. Our cultural and protective patterns are wonderful indicators of a lived experience, and how could it be any other way? But how can we look at that in a non-self-judgmental way? How are you being forgiving and self-compassionate with this statement that your story is, and it's with you, and that's okay, but what is possible? And our physiology and stressors create this sort of toggling between safety and danger in any given moment. And that's why resilience is a continuum, because it's an any given moment experience. This imagery, as our central nervous system processes and protects ourselves and works towards safety and dances between the two, it can also be conceptualized like this, right? Stress trigger and activation, or stress activation. Our protective patterns can mount, they can peak, and then we have this sort of depletion cycle before we can get back, right? This recovery. Well, the invitation using our resilient mindset is about our choice. Through awareness, we become more in control and have the opportunity to choose what and how we respond to those events. And we have the ability to mitigate and lessen the impacts of the stress on ourselves by flattening the emotional curve, right? This is easier said than done. Want to just put that out there. But through this awareness, we can remain centered, and I can notice my activation. I can wonder, assess, that's that curiosity. I can choose, and I can remain centered. So centering is a choice. How do we affect ourselves? How do we move forward through things? And it becomes in this investigation of our protective patterns that I'll offer up to you now, that protective pattern as a function of our own physiology, our stress physiology, et cetera, is important to note. There we go. And so here's the list, right? We have multiple trainings, we have resilience circles that actually help us explore this, but I wanted to sort of, give this opportunity to sort of run through them in a very high overview way, knowing that these are the things that affect us. And we've chosen these as the externalized and internalized versions of how our story, our cultural and protective patterns influence our now, what's happening within us. And I'm proud to say that this was the list that started with a group, or this isn't the list that we started with because defending wasn't actually on that. But through our beta testing and our desire to learn, we said, hey, defending is a place that people need to locate themselves in terms of what they've observed gets in their way sometimes. So distrusting of self or others. Hypervigilance is the awareness. We like to joke that is our spidey senses moving out, right? Perceiving and looking at danger. Hyper caretaking, this notion that we think about others, perform tasks in service to others. And the real delta here is when it's to our own detriment, right? When we don't take care of ourselves. And ultimately avoiding, so we retreat, we move back. Defending, right? Really kind of creating that wall that you need. And then my own default protective pattern is attacking, moving towards that conflict. And just as we present resilience as a continuum, we also want to offer up the validity and rational and understandable emergence of these patterns as useful for you. So it's a balanced presentation, I guess, of this concept of protective pattern. Again, to stay out of self-judgment and shaming of self, but rather I distrust because, well, I got scammed that one time, right? I guess I shouldn't give this person my routing number to my bank account. Like that's healthy distrusting, and you should listen to it, right? So it's honoring our bodies and our patterns and what has been, and then also understanding too that sometimes that's how we get stuck. All right. So all of these are for us to explore deeply, and we do that in our resilience circles, which we call personal resilience arc, where we really check in about what occurred for us week to week. It's a 6-week resilience course. But in service to sort of our educator lens, right, this is self-awareness. When we talk about self-awareness, are our protective patterns, how we react to the world, how they show up, and developing what we call non-self-judgmental awareness, which sits with curiosity, that resilient mindset. And just as a for instance, given our time here, hyper caretaking, what does it look like? Over prioritizing others, especially since I'm speaking to some educators here, theoretically, some of you maybe, I don't know everyone's role, but over prioritizing others, enabling others, and for me as a hyper caretaker in the home life, when I'm not my most resilient self, I use it as a lever, like a, well, I made all the lunches today type of mentality. And so codependency, right? And it really is balanced in the sense that caretaking is great. It's when it starts to tip into these dimensions that we can't handle it, or it working against our bigger goals. But it can help us, right? It's wonderful. We get it. It's there for a reason. Feels needed. It strengthens community. And yet, and still, there are moments where it doesn't allow us to take care of ourselves. And this was a big one for me, really, as I've been working it, is actually doesn't honor others, doesn't allow them to do that. So allowing that capacity to be there. So as we remain centered and start to move into centering and notice and honor our patterns, we have the choice of what skills can serve us. And that sits with, for those of you who are familiar with the sort of stress response, right? You can freeze, fight, or flight is how we talk about it. And our protective patterns sort of nest in those. And sometimes what we like to really talk about is you can actually choose to face them, right? The stressors can be faced using skill development. Our centering skills here, again, not anything that you might not anything you haven't seen, but just also synthesized and accessible in an easy way, right? What does noticing myself look like? How do I listen to my own needs? The benefits and practice of breathing mindfully, how letting go is in our control. I really like the term let in, let be to let go. That's how I access letting go. It's not the easiest skill for me. Finding gratitude, all the attributes and positive attributes of finding gratitude are well documented. And then this concept of positive reframing, taking the situation that is and telling ourselves and looking for a different lens on it. And then ultimately nurturing myself, which I'll cover here briefly. I understand if people have to drop off, but nurturing myself, I think, needs to be honored, right? So self-management is this skill, the skill of centering oneself, creating the world, creating personal resilience, choosing, committing, and practicing to these research-based skills. And for me, nurturing myself is hugely important in order to maintain center in service to the kids. For better health, I nurture myself. And we wanted to make a distinction between nurturing myself and self-care. And a lot of people talk about how nurturing myself seems like an active, proactive approach versus self-care can be reactive. I need sleep, so I rest, versus I'm going to get sleep so I can perform, right? That's the difference between getting the sleep that you need in advance of something, or just taking a nap just so you can be barely functional. So how can I nurture all dimensions of myself? And ultimately, nurturing myself has these multiple domains. And we like to think about that because there are so many dimensions of ourself that we need to nurture that sit beyond the physical. And sometimes self-care, I think we think, let's go for a walk and drink water and sleep. Those are all important, but they're not the all of what's being called for. And if and when we can maintain relationships, right, we can maintain relationships from that centered place. It allows us to be in relationship with our students. And recently I came across this concept of unconditional positive regard for students. When we are centered, it is only from that centered place that we can actually offer up what Alex Vanette says is unconditional positive regard, is communicating to the student, I care about you, you have value, you don't have to do anything to prove it to me, and nothing's going to change my mind. I must be centered to convey that, to co-regulate that, and inspire that in our students. And so as we use this stress arc continuum metaphor, this is us anticipating and practicing resilience. How might these students be showing up after such an extended absence and such a dynamic and tricky 16, 18 months? And in a conversation with a recently retired principal, we sort of talked about this idea that the pandemic was this earthquake, and potentially there are things happening and moving and going to arrive onto the shores of our campuses like a tsunami, right? A wave of feelings and emotions that we've never had to process before collectively. And that's where we really talk about anticipatory resilience, being centered, moving and meeting the moment with these students, our colleagues, and their families. And these are the skills that help us get there, but it starts with being centered so that I can notice others, be heartfelt and empathetic, and choose kindness and speak authentically. That's how I show up from them, to them, in service to them from the beginning. So quick little whip here of how important noticing others is. What are we going to see in them? What could they be carrying? And that we need to connect before we can offer content. It's part of it. So we need to notice them. And just all of your awareness on how much of it is in body language and tone of voice, and your own, how they notice you, right? There's noticing yourself and others, but projecting in and presencing yourself in a way that's open for connection. And that we have the opportunity to listen in a deep and heartfelt way, to create connection in space, to show them that unconditional support that we were referring to. What does that look like? Listening non-judgmentally, taking it in, giving space, open and safe environment. And that ultimately that we can empathize with them through the listening, and that we need to truly understand someone. But also that empathy has different dimensions, right? There's the mind channel, understanding they have feelings, emotional, feeling what they feel, and ultimately we want to inspire in ourselves, moving from a centered place, empathy that leads towards action, right? And then we can feel connected. And then just naming our collaborating skills, which is something we can facilitate and talk about more. Would love to share more, but this is the language of We Are Resilient. It creates worlds in the cultures we lead and in ourselves. In that ultimately it does take practice. And I got this from Happy Child Summit, and just know that centering is the skill that we need to practice, and that we need reminders and repetition and ritual, because Socrates used to say, to know good is to do good, but we'll say not so much. It actually is the theologian that said, this is how we move the idea into practice and into the change behaviors that we want. In order for us to remain centered, we need to take those skills seriously, and that ultimately it comes from us, right? Our internal capacities that allow us to be present, remain centered, so that we can ultimately connect, and serve our students and ourselves in the process. I know I bit off a lot there, but I just am so excited to share some nuggets, get it going. And ultimately here, I just want to share one more thing is that obviously this is the tips of some icebergs of concepts. And I invite you to share our website here. Go to Dovetail Learning, our open free educational resources, because there's whole resources for you to download. Our healthcare, but really this practical skills for educators. I personally like having it in my hand so that I can hold it, touch it, feel it. It's a wonderful product. And I invite you to buy that. It's a very reasonable price point. It's only $25, but it goes into detail on some of the things I just got to share with you. We also have downloadable posters, introductory handout sets, a little more digestible, but the book is so dense with things, as well as our wonderful series of handouts. So hopefully you picked up some good nuggets here. And let me just check my quick, oh, not too many questions. Why isn't this everywhere? Well, I don't know. You tell me, please share. We'd love it to be everywhere, right? Universal mental health promotion is something we all want to push out there, and I'll come full screen here just to answer those last couple. But please share it everywhere. And you ask, why isn't everywhere? I think it's new. I think we're a little ahead of the curve about what it means to really focus on employee wellness at a universal level versus, hey, something went wrong. Here's an employee wellness support or outside counseling services that are free to you as an employee, right? So when we're talking about adult wellness, especially in the school context, everything historically has been routed through, well, what's it good for the kids? But our wellness is what's good for the children. And then the last thing here, react it further. Yeah, so what I'm hearing is when a kid is showing their protective patterns, I guess what the question is about de-escalating, and that's also kind of a distinction. Well, I think first it means not meeting their protective pattern or their reactivity with your own, which is the practice, because we can co-regulate up or we can co-regulate down. And never have I heard or found success when someone's elevating up, unless there's a fear and power dimension that's unhealthy. Yelling at someone to take it down a notch will probably send them deep into an internalized protective pattern of safety, right? And now we've fractured the relationship. So I'm just saying it's remaining safe. And you have to have this sort of dual awareness of what's escalating and the other children in safety. And when's a good time to apply those lessons for yourself. But I found that waiting patiently, empathetic listening, showing concern, those are the things that allow you to connect, but you have to stay centered. Also, it's not lost on me that other kids' behavior can be really disruptive for the other students, and you have to kind of know what your team and your protocols are to keep others safe, and then move in an empathetic, supportive way to invite that child to whatever's next, or other adults whose role that is to help serve together. All right. A little long, but hopefully dense and rich and of service to you. So again, I just want to thank you on behalf of myself and our team at Dovetail Learning. Thanks for taking a little bit of your time here today to go on a walk with me on our program overview, emphasize your need, honor what you've been experiencing so that we can be of more service when the start of school comes. All right, thanks so much.